A pretty significant amount of people have concerns over vaccinations. And I think instead of attacking them or belittling them, I think we should be addressing their concerns. So one of the major concerns that anti-vaxxers have often contain fears about autism. And it's understandable. I understand why you would be afraid, but most of that fear comes from a lack of understanding over what autism is. And to basically understand autism, you need to understand that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, which means autism forms while the baby is still in the womb, while still developing. Now keep in mind, the symptoms might not show up until a certain age, usually it's about 2 or 3, sometimes later, sometimes earlier. That's why a lot of people will be angry, and they'll say, my child wasn't like this, and now I gave them the vaccine, and now they have autism. Well, they didn't get autism because of the vaccine. They already had autism. The symptoms just didn't show up until the time when the vaccinations are generally given. Now, another fear that anti-vaxxers generally have are often chemicals and additives within the vaccination itself. And the thing that they most commonly talk about is mercury. Now, one important thing to understand is that just because it's called mercury doesn't mean it's toxic. Now keep in mind, mercury does exist in a toxic form, but the mercury that's used in the vaccinations is not. It's called thimerosal, and it just has mercury in it. The compound itself isn't mercury. Now surprisingly, the toxic form of mercury we find in fish, especially tuna. So if you're eating fish and tuna and other kinds of seafood, then you have nothing to be afraid of vaccinations, of the thimerosal in vaccinations. It's non-toxic, it's completely safe. Just because it has mercury doesn't mean anything. I could say hydrogen is used in nuclear bombs, but guess what? Hydrogen's also found in our water. Same exact thing with the mercury and the thimerosal. Now, another issue that a lot of people will be talking about in terms of fear-mongering for vaccinations, we'll usually find a long list of chemicals and say are additives. Just because these chemicals sound scary doesn't mean they're dangerous. And that's really important, because a lot of times what people will do is they'll come with these scary sounding chemicals, and they'll be, this is what you're putting in your child. I could easily just turn this around and use the same method by saying something like a chemical called hydroxylic acid. I could tell you hydroxylic acid is a chemical with a level of toxicity. Everyone who has consumed hydroxylic acid has either died or will die, guaranteed. I could tell you hydroxylic acid has been involved in deaths both directly and indirectly. And I could tell you it's a danger now that hydroxylic acid is now found in our plumbing. It's in our pipes. We're drinking this. But what you may not know is that hydroxylic acid is simply just water. It's a chemical name for water. Pretty uncommon name, but the idea of when we hear names that we're not familiar with, names that we associate with dangerous chemicals, we often get scared. And that's understandable. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It doesn't mean you're easily manipulated. It's a natural human response. Don't let the chemicals found in all of these lists scare you from vaccinations. Now, one other important thing to understand, a lot of people will have fears that vaccinations are pushed by the pharmaceutical industries. They're forcing you. They want to just keep milking you for money. That's not true. Why is it not true? Let's say a vaccination for MMR costs, I'm gonna guess somewhere like $30, $34. Anywhere from $28 to $38. That's the vaccination. That's to prevent you from getting the disease. Let's say the illness of measles, let's say it would cost maybe upwards of $5,000 to $7,000 to treat. Now, pharmaceutical companies were really only in it for the money, which makes the logical choice. Giving a vaccination for only $28 or treating and giving medicine for $5,000. Now, that's not to say pharmaceutical companies aren't in it for a profit. Of course, it's a free market, it's capitalism. Of course they're in it for a profit. But it's not the only thing they're after. And most importantly, most specifically, vaccinations aren't meant for profit. If anything, vaccinations are a decline in profit. Now, one other very, very important thing that a lot of people will be discussing, a lot of people will point towards trends, and they'll say, here's the trend of vaccinations going up, and here's the trend of autism going up, and they'll say, see, autism is going up as vaccination is going up. But this is a misconception. It's a very common misconception, and one of the things that people who say these things don't understand is that this is an advancement in science. Just like we advanced our knowledge and creation of vaccinations, we also discovered our understanding of things like autism. Just because there are more cases of autism doesn't mean that more people have autism. It just means that we're better at diagnosing it. It just means that we're better at finding a person and accurately treating them and understanding what it means. It doesn't mean that the vaccination caused it, and correlation does not imply causation. Okay, so now let's say you don't want to get vaccinated. You say it's your choice. Why should that affect the population? But the reality is that it does. It really affects the population, and it's not just your choice as much as it is your body. You have to keep in mind that other people depend on you getting vaccinated. People like babies who can't get vaccinated, people like cancer patients who are immunocompromised because of the chemo, people that have allergy to vaccinations and can't get vaccinated. By refusing to vaccinate, you're putting these people at risk, even more risk than they already are. A lot of these diseases are preventable diseases. They're not something that is supposed to kill you, at least with vaccinations. Now, without vaccinations, they could. Sure, you might know someone who got the disease and they're fine today, nothing's wrong, but that doesn't apply to everyone. Everyone's different, and just because someone you know might have been fine with that disease doesn't mean that everyone will be fine. And the reality is a lot of people do die from things like measles and rubella, and we have a responsibility as human beings to try to protect these people's lives with as little as we could do. Something like vaccinations, I understand why there's a fear, I understand why there are conspiracies and skepticism, but it's important to break down this fear. Let's not let this fear control us, and more specifically, let's not let this fear control our lives and our health. I hope we can look deeper into things. I hope we can understand that conspiracies will always exist, but our research should be from reputable sources. It's important not to look at just any sort of website and be like, follow this. Even what I'm saying, you could fact check everything that I'm saying, and I encourage that. I don't want you to take what I say off on a silver platter and be like, this is it, this is what we're gonna follow. Cross-check everything I say. Make sure that it's correct. Everyone has a responsibility to make a difference. Be the change you want to see.